This is The Camp with Zach Heilprin and the Athletics' Jesse Temple.
Yes, welcome in. We're back. So a little bit of a slow period for the Badgers, but things are going to start ramping up here as they get back for summer workouts. I know some of them back in town already, and they will be getting those underway. The freshmen going to be arriving here very quickly as well. And before you know it, fall camp will be here, Jesse. But we still got a few months. Still got a few months before that happens, before we're in Indianapolis for Big Ten Media Days. There is plenty of stuff going on in college athletics. We'll get into just maybe a little bit of the NCAA lawsuit and some of the stuff that may be coming out of that. We'll talk a little bit about that. Also, someone put Luke Fickell on the hot seat, college football news, and we'll try and understand where they're coming from in that. I don't think we're going to be able to understand where they're coming from that, but we'll try. Also, Bill Connolly released his SP Plus updated after the portal season, and he really likes Wisconsin's defense. I don't know if and does not like the offense at all. And I know it's not him, it's his numbers, but we'll get into that as well. But we're going to start with the transfer portal, Jesse, where Wisconsin has been active, right, over the entirety of this spring and last winter as well. Added some pieces, but they have not been able to add their defensive line room, where they felt like I don't want to call them desperately trying to add, but they certainly felt like they were going after quite a few defensive linemen in the portal and came up empty on all of them, outside of obviously Elijah Hill back in the winter.
Yeah, this is far from an ideal situation. Obviously, news about the portal gets out very quickly in the social media era because a kid is going to tweet that he got an offer from somebody. And when we were at spring practice, we could actually see them there visiting. And it was very clear that this spring, what they felt was one of the most important positions to add was the defensive line. They brought in CJ West, who was a defensive lineman at Kent State. And because defensive linemen are in such short supply, guys who could be impact playmakers, he instantly became one of the most sought after portal players and ended up at Indiana. And then the other one that it seemed like maybe they'll get him is Javier Suggs, because he played at Grand Valley State, which is the D2 school that Matt Mitchell was at, and we're able to get him up, but he's at LSU. So not an ideal situation. Now you're going into the season, at least at this point. We'll see. Maybe there's somebody else out there with 9 scholarship defensive linemen, but you're still looking for impact playmakers. That, I know we talked out of the spring, was one of the biggest positions that came with question marks out of the spring about what is that exactly going to look like. So defensive line, critical position that Wisconsin missed on this spring.
Yeah, and I don't like. I think we have talked about it a lot, where it's kind of the position that we look at, and I think we both agree with this, that it's the one with it raises the biggest eyebrows about like what they can be this fall, and can they hold up their end of the bargain? Because this past year, at least against the rush, they weren't very good. And again, I know it's not just the defensive line; it's everybody that plays a role in that, and they remade the outside linebacker room and remade the inside linebacker room. So there's some new faces that will obviously have a role in making that better this year. But behind James Thompson Jr., and if we want to give Kurt Neal, a pass, not a pass, but like we think he's going to be pretty good. And obviously Ben Barton has played some football. The lack of proven players there is tough, and you certainly looking for a proven player to come in from the portal, and right now they don't have that. So you're going to be counting on some guys that aren't necessarily proven. That doesn't mean it's bad, but you're counting on something of an unknown at this point, and that is very tough when you struggled to stop the run last year. And some people have pointed to 2018. We all know what happened in 2018 with the defensive line when you got Garrett Rand going out with an injury, and you had obviously Isaiah Loudermilk dealing with an injury for a large portion of the beginning of the season. And he had to like move Caden Lyles over to defensive line. They're not that. They're not at that point, certainly, at all, right? They're in a much better spot than that. But the last time they really, really, truly, truly struggled to stop the run was that year, and it just made for a very long season for the entire defense. Again, They've got some young guys that they like, Jamal Howard, Ernest Willer, and you get Dylan Johnson in here very, very soon, and maybe he can have a season. Oh, I don't know, maybe not like a Keanu Benton type of season where he ends up being a starter, but he gives you some really good reps and snaps. But I'd be very worried about it. And I think based on what they tried to do in the portal, I think Wisconsin's a little bit worried about it.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on the defensive line in general. One is what you're talking about. I do think that this staff, which obviously started with Greg Scruggs and now has to continue under a new coach, but they've got some very good young talent just based on what you feel like their potential is with Jamel Howard, with Ernest Willer, and certainly with Dylan Johnson. And Hank Weber is the other true freshman who's going to be coming in. I know the last show we did, I briefly touched on a story that I was working on about Dylan Johnson. 143-1 as a wrestler at the high school level, 4 state championships in Illinois, great connection with Fickell. But we've seen it's really hard, and Keanu Benton is an exception for especially a true freshman to come in position and be ready for physically. Now, if anybody could do it, I would think it would be Johnson. But we liked Ernest Willer, and he spent the spring with the third team defense. So like that should tell you that was a 4-star guy. And at the time Willer committed, I believe he was the highest rated uncommitted player left in the class. So it will take a little bit of time. And the other thing that I think in general is maybe I use the word impact playmakers like it should happen more. I mean, it probably should happen more frequently at Wisconsin, but if we think about the time that we've been covering this team, how many true studs have they had on the defensive line? Now, they've had some good players. Statistically, I don't think a ton of those guys have really blown the doors off you, but so I'm not sure, is it fair to say they need somebody to be Keanu Benton or multiple guys to be Keanu Benton when they really haven't had that many historically? It's just sort of an interesting dynamic. That's not excusing them. If this staff, it's their job to find those guys. I just think what we've seen the last decade plus highlights the challenge of getting someone like that.
I don't disagree. Yet I will say what is the thing that Greg Scruggs had said, and even I think Mike Tressel at times has said, and probably Luke Fickell as well, what they want out of the defensive line. They want to cause havoc.
Yeah.
Like they want those guys to cause havoc. So this isn't, while I don't disagree with you about not having necessarily guys that jump out and hit you in the face, they want these guys to jump out and hit you in the face.
Yes.
They want to create plays on the other side of the line of scrimmage. They don't want guys to be holding up blocks and making it so that the linebackers can go and make all the plays that Leo Chanel and Jack Sanborn and go on down the list of all the inside linebackers that Wisconsin has had in the last decade. That's not necessarily, I mean, that was the last defense. This is this defense where they want you to play with create chaos, and we didn't see a lot of that last year. Maybe the bodies that were there weren't necessarily the chaos creating type, and that's fine. But they didn't go ahead and add any of those guys this offseason either. So that to me is a little bit of the concern here. They want those guys to be the numbers guys, right? And it's not just sacks or TFLs, but pressures, right? And so I don't disagree with you. Like, do you need someone special? Historically, Wisconsin, that has not been the case, but this defense seems to, really hit its stride when you have somebody like that. And I don't know that Wisconsin has that outside of maybe James Thompson Jr., who showed some chaos creating ability, and Kurt Neal did in the bowl game too. It's just, can they do it consistently? And if they are not healthy the entire time, you can't just play two. You need some other guys to step up. So that it's a concern. It's going to be a concern until we see guys that actually can do the things that they want them to do.
I think
So
that is fair. But
yeah,
at least they did some work at other positions in the portal.
they did. They did. They went ahead and added, obviously, in the offseason, I should say in the winter, we saw a lot of guys in spring. We came out of spring thinking the wide receiver room was pretty set. They just disagree with that. They went ahead and added some, or they went after a number of guys. They ended up landing Joseph Griffin Jr., the transfer from Boston College. He's 6'3", he's 200 pounds. He's a guy that he's a big guy on the outside, which is exactly what I think maybe they lack. Now, is he going to be a guy that comes in and takes reps right away? I'm a little bit unsure of. I don't know how you feel about it.
There's no way to know. I think this ad to me is fascinating because what they did was go out and get someone who, at least at the college level, is proven. He's coming off a season where he caught 25 passes for 345 yards and a touchdown. And the year before, he had 5 touchdown catches. So that's 2 full seasons of at least showing what you can do at the college level. And then the question just becomes what does the numbers game look like here if we're just looking out at guys on the outside? We know that Bryson Green is one of those guys. Kenny Guyton spoke very highly of Vinny Anthony at the other spot on the outside, but CJ Williams and Quincy Burrows were in the mix there too. And so Griffin coming in challenges that to me, because I think he certainly will have an opportunity to contribute this year. They're not going to play, I don't think, 7 wide receivers, 8 wide receivers. If they play 6, that's a really good situation. And maybe it ends up being 5, just like we saw last season. So, what we have learned, or what I think I've learned from watching this staff operate, especially in this transfer portal era, is that they are going to continue to push at a lot of these positions and they will over recruit you and create that competition. But it's hard to know exactly because I would have said with Tyrell Henry, if you looked at his numbers at Michigan State last season, oh, he caught 3 touchdown passes, had 20 plus catches. He's going to be in the mix. And you can't know until you see it. And this spring, Henry got some opportunity, but if I had to say, here's the top 6, I might have had him 7th. So even if it isn't a thing for next season, it's a play for the year after that, hypothetically. And it's also a numbers game in scholarship because they have, when you include Hawken Anderson being added on scholarship, now officially they've got 11 scholarship wide receivers, but they had, I think, 12 at the start of last year, which is the number that they wanted, that 11 to 12 range. So it's twofold. It's having enough bodies that you can rotate, but then having someone who can come in and actually push for snaps.
Yeah. So what do you think you need on the outs? What do you think they need on the outside? To me, they need a guy that's going to take the top off of defense, right? Like a big guy
100%.
that's going to take a top off the defense. Among the returners, returning guys, they have one on the outside that averaged more than 10 yards per catch. And that was Bryson Green. He averaged 15. Nobody else. Chimray was up there, but he's not coming back, obviously, right? Will Pauling on the inside averaged 11.3. Nobody else was above in double digits. That's what they need. I mean, is it possible that Joseph Griffin gives that to them? I mean, he averaged 13.8 yards per catch this past season on 25 catches, which at least is a nice number. It's at least 25 catches, 345 yards. Like that is at least some production where you can. It's not just 1 or 2 catches that he's averaging over double digits, right? It's like there is some basis to it. I If he's going to give them a deep threat, that'd be great. I don't know that is going to be the role that he'll have at Wisconsin, but again, I understand what they're looking for. We hear that from Phil Longo all the time, not all the time, but on a regular basis. Is just wait till this offense gets that explosive guy on the outside, and they're certainly hoping that Quincy Burrows can help with that. Vinny Anthony a little bit more towards the end of last season. Maybe he can help with that. CJ Williams, we'll see. It's just they don't necessarily have that guy to take the top off the defense, and it makes it very, very difficult to be a successful offense on a consistent basis if you're not able to hit some big plays in the pass game. We saw how good the offense looked in the bowl game because they were able to hit on some of those. It's not necessarily you have to be on the outside to make those plays. We saw Will Pauling do that, and Treshka Kahuna for that matter as well. But it would seem that Longo wants that guy with that ability, and um, I don't know if we'll see if Griffin's someone that could potentially give it to him. You know who could have given it to him had he actually stayed around was Keontez Lewis, but he decided he decided he didn't want to do that. But yes, so the portal. Do you think they're done with the portal here?
Well, I will never say never, but my question at this time would be who is left that is at a high enough level that they believe can fit. Certainly, if there's any position, it's got to be defensive line. I don't necessarily see them adding anywhere else at this point. And you also just have to consider what the scholarship numbers look like. The unofficial total at this point would put them right at the 85. And guys who are going to leave had their window to leave. So I would think that they're probably done. But if you added one, the defensive line would make the most sense. It's just who's left.
Yeah, and we also know that guys after summer sometimes leave, right?
We certainly saw that. I vaguely recall some tight ends no longer being with the program and then them being in big trouble at that position.
Showing up on the day of fall camp opening, and yeah, these guys aren't here. So, all right, sweet. All right. So Wisconsin went 7-6 last year in Luke Fickell's first year. It was not the year that many of us expected. It's not the year that many of us predicted. But he signed a pretty long contract, and Wisconsin has invested a ton in him. But that didn't necessarily matter, I guess, to College Football News, who has Luke Fickell among their top 10 coaches on the hot seat this year. Now, on its face, it's like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. It makes even less sense when you hear the reasoning behind it, because Pete Fatuk, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it or not, but uh, all the changes and moves in a 7-6 season might be a step back to take a huge leap forward, but the program that's been a model of consistency has to make some noise. Then he points to the schedule, and then at the end of it, he says, but no, of course, Fickell won't get canned with another mediocre year. All right, then why you put him on the hot seat? Like, I don't understand that. If he's not, like, hot seat would suggest that he's a guy that could get fired this year. That's clearly not going to be the case. That said, Jesse, for you, where is Luke Fickell in that? Is it mildly warm? Is it cold? Is it where would you put this? I think he gets a number of years just based on the money that they've given to him and the um obviously his pedigree coming in. Like there's just he's not anywhere close to it in my mind.
It is not even a discussion, frankly, or shouldn't be, unless you need some off-season fodder, which even the writer
Apparently we do.
acknowledges doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. Um, we know that Chris McIntosh and Luke Fickell are tied here because McIntosh made the biggest decision of his brief tenure here and moving on from Paul Chryst and then hiring Luke Fickell at a salary that averages out to, I believe, $7.8 million over many, many seasons. And I also think if you're just around the program, you realize over the last couple of seasons the decline that we've seen and that this is something that takes time. I know we're sort of in an instant gratification type of world, but there are probably various levels to how one would feel about Wisconsin and Luke Fickell after year two, depending on what the record is. You have to acknowledge the schedule, and it's funny as I did a story that's running Friday where I ranked all 12 regular season games in terms of how appealing they are, and just going down the list, you really realize, my God, there's a lot of hard matchups, and when you start to try and figure out how many wins they could actually have, they could have a better team, like we've said, and end up with the same regular season record as a year ago. Maybe if they go 3-9 or something, you feel pretty badly. But even that, I think, given the financial commitment they've made to Fickell and just how long it takes to probably get Wisconsin where it needs to be, I don't see a situation where you could even say the hot seat. And I think that conversation could change with a bad season and then a year three that is also bad. But even then, this is a long play by bringing in Fickell, who had tremendous success at Cincinnati, and obviously that changed in year two, but I just don't see it right now.
All right, good. So it's ridiculous. I'm glad we got brought it up and we're able to shut it down.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So going back a little bit to the defense and just where Wisconsin is heading into this year, Bill Connolly from ESPN, he does his SP Plus rankings. It's based on, at this point, returning production, recent recruiting, and recent history. And he's got Wisconsin ranked, or his numbers have Wisconsin at 27th in the country. That kind of sounds about right to me. But then you go and look at the numbers that it's based on, and he's got the offense 80th and the defense 7th. Are either of those ones correct in your mind, do you think?
No, not. I don't think so, but it's hard to pick a number, and he's certainly got the metrics to back up the rationale for spitting out those numbers. But
Yeah.
so let's start with the defense. If you look at last season, it's nowhere close to the expectations that we've had for the group when Mike Tressel came in talking about that idea of meshing the elite between what he wanted to do and what Jim Leonard wanted to do. but I also think it wasn't awful. It just was awful by Wisconsin standards. Just if you look across the board, they were 38th nationally in total defense, 39th in pass defense and run defense, 20th in scoring defense. When we've seen Wisconsin be a top five defense and in some of these categories, number one in the country for several years, it almost felt like the defense ranked 120th. So I think they're coming from a place where um, they're in a better position, I think, than where the offense was coming from. And we've seen them add a lot, particularly at the linebacker position. So I can see them being a top 20 type of defense. So like seventh, it sort of opens your eyes. But I don't think that, I mean, I expect significant improvement from that defense, if that makes sense, because they're not coming from being like the worst defense in the country.
Correct. They're not. And they also, again, the returning production is there. And the
Yes.
recent recruiting is there. And the recent history is there. So that all kind of makes sense to me, right? You bring back your leading tackler and Hunter Wooler and Jake Chaney. You have the guy that led you in sacks and in Daryl Peterson back, and Chaney had three. And then obviously with Ricardo Holman back, you have essentially all your guys that made plays in the ball last year back. So it makes a ton of sense. And then you went and added guys that also made plays at their own schools, whether it's the 3.5 sacks from Leon Lowry, right, or what John Pius did, or what Jaheim Thomas did in leading he was one of the top tacklers in the SEC. So like you have all these guys that production wise, it kind of makes sense. Seventh just seems a bit high. But
Yeah.
again, the idea behind it, I understand the idea behind it. The offense with the returning production, you lose your leading passer, you lose your leading rushers. I should say your leading rusher. You lose a guy like Chimere Dike. So the numbers kind of make sense, but I think the offense is going to be so much better than that.
Yeah.
And I understand how these numbers are played out, but I think the offense will far out perform that number, and as opposed to where I think the defense may be a little bit lower.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had read that the defense was projected to be 20th in the country, would that have sounded more reasonable? Would that have,
Yeah,
because that's kind of where I feel it's again, that's more gut feel and not statistical analysis.
yeah, no, it's again, I understand what he. It's this is just a predictive. It's
Sure.
how it's predictive. It's predictive measure, trying to figure out what teams are going to be good. You know what I mean? Like, what you're having to do this on is not necessarily ideal. But yes, if they had said the defense 20th, absolutely. If they had said the offense 50th, if the
Hmm.
numbers had played that out and the offense like 50th, be like, yeah, I mean, I think the offense can be better than that, but that at least makes a little bit more sense for me. But again,
Yeah.
they when you lose what they lost numbers wise on offense, I get it. And I just think the offense is going to be so much better than what that number would suggest. And that's just what it is. But I think Wisconsin in general is kind of flying under the radar. Would you agree with that? Like I feel like all these top 25s, no, they're not there. And that I also agree with. You know what I mean? Like I'm completely fine with ranking Wisconsin at this point because I'm in the you got to prove it to me phase that it's 30 to 35 at this point. Kind of makes sense to me. 27th is higher than I probably would have them at this point, just because we don't know exactly what it's all going to look like, and I am taking a little bit more measured approach than last year. Does that where would you have them?
Yeah,
I mean,
like low 30s. I
yeah,
think that 30 to 35 range makes sense. And the other thing here is we're going into a season with a new Big Ten, an expanded Big Ten with good teams coming in. There are so many teams that, at least on paper at this point, are so talented that are ahead of Wisconsin. So it's very easy, I think, for the Badgers, at least from a national perspective, or even a regional Big Ten type of perspective, to get lost in the shuffle. You haven't really been a good football team since 2019. And think about all the teams that are coming into the season as ranked opponents. I mean, Oregon is a top five team. Penn State's going to be a top 15 team. Iowa in some polls is going to be nationally ranked. And that doesn't even include the teams that Wisconsin isn't going to play in the regular season, like Ohio State and Michigan. And there's just a lot of really good teams. So it's very easy, I think, to get buried. But that is part of the challenge in general of them trying to rise above in one of the toughest leagues in the country.
Safe to say they will not be ranked in the preseason AP top 25.
I don't see it. I look at all these way too early top 25s, including ours, and I don't see Wisconsin there. And I'm not necessarily sure what's going to change between now and then. The good news, however, is they will have numerous opportunities to try and get in there, starting with week 3 against Alabama, which I think at that time will be a top 10 team. So we've seen seasons like this before, too, from Wisconsin, where they've been a little bit underrated, and then you start winning early. But this schedule is just so challenging.
Well, it actually kind of reminds me of 2016 a little bit because they
Yep.
were not ranked in 2016 going into that year. They opened with LSU and beat them. But if you look back at that 2016 schedule, some of the teams that the runs that they had to play, and it was, I mean, they had Ohio State and Michigan in back-to-back weeks that year. They lost both of those games, but they ended up still staying in the rankings just because of how they played in those games. But I think it was a 3-week stretch where and this was when Michigan State was still good. They went it was at Michigan State, at Michigan, home to Ohio State, and then at Iowa. I mean, that is as tough of a schedule as you could have in that moment, right? And obviously Michigan State ended up being no good, and LSU ended up being no good eventually. Actually, where'd they finish? Did they finish the top 15? They might have finished the top 15, but anyway, they fired their coach there in the middle of the year. So it wasn't good. It wasn't good. And it was Les Miles, right? And then they got what the hell is the guy's name? That their
Ed,
coach
Ed
that
Orgeron.
yeah, Ed Orgeron that ended up winning a national title, and then he got fired. But that's the type of schedule that they're going to be facing this year. But yeah, I don't expect them to be in the top 25, which would be the first time since 2016, at least in the preseason rankings.
That's
You mentioned
remarkable.
right,
Like, especially when you can, I mean, we know that preseason rankings are based on what your perception of a program is, what you think they're going to be, even though you truly have no idea. But I think it speaks to the reputation Wisconsin has had, and maybe also just the fact that they've been falling flat repeatedly here in the last 5 years.
right, yes, I they have been. I mean, they've started fourth in 2018, and we all know how that season played out. They started 12th in 2020, 12th in 2021. I mean, yeah, it doesn't really matter where you start, right? It doesn't, but it kind of does as well a little bit. Just
More fun.
having your name there and people talking about you. There was also this thing about the Alabama game time. People were not happy with it being an 11 a.m. start, but it makes sense. The
I mean,
Fox is going to put that stuff in there. Now, a lot of people thought apparently Fox like people thought that that was like Fox's top choice that week, or that was the top choice, and they picked him. But apparently, Fox traded its third pick. I don't know if you know how any of that stuff works, but like Fox got like the first 3 weeks of the first pick, and they traded their third pick because they didn't. It's weird. It's either way. Wisconsin and Alabama going to kick off at 11 a.m. Going to be on Fox, the big noon kickoff. No Friday night Big Ten games. It sounds like at least on Fox
yeah.
for Wisconsin. However, that Western Michigan game, the South Dakota game, those could potentially be moved to Friday if they wanted to. They still have to fill the voids in Big Ten Network and FS1, and so I wouldn't be surprised if one of those Wisconsin games ends up on a Friday night, considering they're not on a Friday night any of those other ones. But
I think
uh,
I think we should have probably led the show with the Alabama Wisconsin start
yeah,
time, given the uproar that appears to have happened. And I totally get it. I think selfishly, as you know, the 11 a.m. game slot is perfect for a reporter, but fans don't care about that because you're usually done by 6, 7 p.m. And maybe you can even see some of the night games. But from a pure atmosphere standpoint and a fan standpoint, who wouldn't want to have the team of the decade, one of the great teams in college football, show up for a 7 p.m. game where the fans have ample opportunity to, shall we say, get well lubricated.
Yes. Yeah.
And like you know what that atmosphere is like at night. Think of the 2010 game against Ohio State and some of the other night games they've had since then. I think it would have been one of the most special atmospheres that I've seen and maybe we've ever seen. And 11 o'clock just changes that dynamic. It doesn't, to me, lessen the excitement and enthusiasm about having Alabama there because it's still one of the biggest games that I think Wisconsin will play at Camp Randall Stadium, especially if Alabama is a top 10 team. Very rarely have they played a top 10 non-conference opponent at home. I don't think it's happened in I think the last time it happened was the Miami game where the Hurricanes somehow gave up the first field goal and then scored 51 straight. And that was the Don Morton 1989 year. Like this just doesn't happen. That was 35 years ago. And I think the last time Wisconsin won one of these was 50 years ago against fourth ranked Nebraska. So, but a night game would have been awesome. It just wasn't in the cards.
Yeah. Man, I mean, they've got other opportunities, right? Like Penn State, Oregon, both coming here. There's certainly a possibility for those games to potentially end up at night, and that'd be a little bit colder, obviously. But before we go, there obviously is big news on a national front. There was a settlement with the House versus NCAA case that is going to see the NCAA schools that are part of the NCAA pay $2.7 billion back to the players that were unable to make money prior to that 2021, the NIL coming into play in 2021, where the Supreme Court ruled that they could make money off their name, image, and likeness. And it's, probably not going to hit Wisconsin too hard. The NCAA is going to be paying 1.1 billion. They're going to do that up front. And then 1.6 billion is going to be set aside for payment for a decade. And most of that money is going to be being withheld then from distribution to conferences, revenue distribution to conferences. And for Wisconsin and the Big Ten, it's probably not going to hurt them too much. However, there's a part of this also, as part of this lawsuit, that is going to allow schools to spend up to $20 million per year to pay current athletes. Are we officially now? I mean, it's kind of have been already in the pay for play, but now schools being allowed to do this. Is this kind of just the start of what is going to be what it is? And again, there's so many specifics that need to be worked out and details that need to be worked out. But that is the thing that I think kind of jumps out for everybody in this. And I don't necessarily think it's a horrible thing.
It's essentially cutting out the middleman and what has become pay for play. You can use different wording, but
Yeah.
what are we talking about here? Especially more so the transfer portal, and this does trickle down to high school recruiting, but with transfers, especially if you're proven and you've got 10 schools coming after you, the number one topic of conversation is how much can you offer me? If that isn't pay for play, then I don't know what is. I
Yeah.
think if you have a chance to have a $20 million bank, it puts you on more of a level playing field. I'm just thinking strictly from Wisconsin's perspective. Obviously, Wisconsin has the varsity collective and has been pushing its NIL efforts. We know what's happened on the basketball side and losing some guys and other schools offering more money. That's not to say Wisconsin doesn't have money, but if you have that much at your disposal, I think it makes you more of a player in what has become full on free agency.
Yeah, for sure. And again, the 20 million, there's a whole, I mean, that number is what it is. They have to figure out how to distribute it, especially Title IX wise. Like that's probably going to be an issue and what exactly the collective's role will be going forward. I'm very interested to see how it plays out. We'll see. Jesse, we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Zach. Talk soon.
All right. All right. There he is. Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.